Okay, I'm going to read most of this. In her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, Ursula Le Guin describes a society in a permanent state of festival. The weather is perfect, life is delightful, nobody has to work, every day is a carnival of joy and perfection. But at around the age of 12, every child in Omelas is taken to the basement of a random house down a back street. They peer through a window in the door to see a single, starving, mistreated child with a hastily filled bowl. So the people go in, fill the bowl with food and water and get out, so the child has no human interaction. Lives in absolute state of squalor. The water is rank, covered in mould. It's very much like Travis Gray's bedroom at Ondas. The child begs to be let out of this filth and squalor, promising everyone to be good, crying for human love and affection, and at least some of the the child is Travis, but the child begs to be let out of this filth and squalor. Well, no, he kind of embraces it, but promising to be good, crying for human love and affection, and at least some of the comforts constitutive of basic human dignity. But nobody ever speaks to it.
Definitely not Travis.
No. I'll give you a moment. I hadn't actually built any jokes in yet, but of course we brought up Travis. But nobody ever speaks to it. They stare for a moment, and then they return to the festival. That suffering wretch is the quilting point for the society of Omelas, the location onto which all of the despair and misfortune of this civilization can be concentrated, so that everybody else can enjoy their lives. A patchwork society held together by this ragged cloth.
Yes! Timing!
In the Commonwealth, of course, we too have our dutiful children who must suffer the constitutional burden of holding executive power in reserve. The reward for this is imprisonment in Buckingham Palace, or Windsor Castle, or Kensington, or Holyrood House, or Sandringham, or Balmoral, or Highgrove, or Hillsborough, or Unmere Hall, or Burke Hall, or Yarralumla, or Admiralty House if you feel inclined to visit the colonies. With servants delivering sandwiches and drivers to escort you to the places you're going, with all the pomp and pageantry and power and privilege associated with the British royal family, legions of fans, a fawning press and cucumber sandwiches for days. Absolute misery.
Where were the cucumber sandwiches today?
Oh my god, I see.
We had egg sandwiches. This is poor people.
Oh, I'm sorry. Egg is not cucumber.
It's true. Sex education, everybody.
Monarchy, said Mary of Teck in The Crown, is God's sacred mission to grace and dignify the earth. To give the rest of us a vision of nobility, to inspire us in our wretched lives. But what of the other rulers of the earth who are shackled in diamond chains? Poor Jeffrey Epstein might have ended up in real prison.
As opposed to being...
Before he definitely did not kill himself. But we shouldn't forget the suffering financial class from which he emerged. It's time for some facts. But also, why did someone create that infographic? So, in the lead up to the global financial crisis in 2008, hedge fund manager Stephen Cohen bought this piece of artwork by Damien Hirst called The Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. It's an Australian tiger shark preserved in a tank. The original version started rotting away, and the tank became too cloudy to see the shark, so they caught and stuffed a new one. And Cohen acquired this for somewhere around $12 million. Where did he get the money to acquire this snoutrageous aquatic sculpture? Securities and derivatives, highly complex financial instruments that characterize financialized neoliberalism. Slide. You see, when banks loan money to you for a home, they've developed a pretty innovative...
Why is she so tall?
Indeed, what a strange...
Wow! Wow! Down with the patriarchy, what the fuck?
When banks lend money to you for a home, they've developed a pretty innovative product whereby they sell your debt to another party, usually an investment firm or hedge fund, recovering the money that they loaned to you, enabling them to offer loans to other people. That unsold...
Why is she so toilet shaped?
That unsold...
That's a man.
That unsold debt is what is known as an asset-backed security. The investor gets your loan repayments over time in exchange for taking on some of the risk associated with that you might not repay the loan. So, asset-backed securities were then innovated further, becoming what's called collateralized debt obligations, where they were structured into tranches of various levels of risk. Loans with high credit ratings would be bundled together into a low-risk product, but they were more expensive to buy but guaranteed a return over time. And then higher risk loans were sold on the cheap, but there was a chance, obviously, that, you know, the person would not repay the loan and that you wouldn't actually make any money out of it. The whole idea behind this system... The whole idea behind this system was that someone with cash...
Why is he like steaming? That's actually a tentacle coming out of the toilet.
I have so many questions.
He's an tentacle.
Maybe I over
I have questions.
engineered the icons.
Did you overrate it?
Like, why are the graphic going capturing the guy's nuts on this man kissing outside?
I want the man's nuts outlined.
I like that he's pissing in a toilet outside.
He's thoughtful.
He could be in the field.
Like I said, this guy represents a risky mortgage holder.
Agreed.
The whole idea behind this system was that someone with cash could purchase the risk and pocket the reward, and the law of aggregation would ensure that these abstract financial products could never lose anybody any money. But of course, underlying this were two matters of faith. Americans were prisoners of their mortgage, which they foolishly believed was attached to an asset, their home, which would increase in value forever. Once the truth came out that many of these mortgages were subprime and people weren't able to make their repayments, the market collapsed, causing more mortgages to default, causing the complex instrument structured around the sale of risk to collapse in value, and the whole system was brought to the edge until Obama paid the banks $1 trillion of taxpayers' money, which the government borrowed, and which those same defaulted Americans who lost their homes would one day have to pay through tax anyway. The consequence, the consequence, billions of dollars of payouts to bank CEOs, courtesy of the American taxpayer who lost their home through foreclosure. Keep the art, you decaying shark. Blow up the economy. Walk away with a golden parachute. None of these people saw prison time. Well, Epstein did a decade later. But that was for a child sex trafficking ring, which speaks volumes about the moral condition of the investment class. If art is a reflection of society and like the good dialectical materialist that I am for the purposes of this speech, it is. I believe that the situation looks pretty catastrophic. And why? A more recent example, please, Pat.
Where's Wally? Please, Pat.
This piece of art
Where am I?
sold last month for $69.3 million.
No.
How much of that is it?
The start probably a lot. Wait for it. The starting bid was $100 for this thing. Why is this significant apart from the art being a pile of shit? Well, the art is digital only. What the bidder actually paid for was a blockchain certified non-fungible token, meaning that the specific JPEG that they downloaded was uniquely certified. And that's all they paid for. The image itself is literally identical to this. Yeah. And when I say identical, I don't mean in the sense that like a print of Whistler's mother is kind of similar. It's literally identical except for this certification NFT saying, yeah.
Wait, hang on.
No,
Patrick.
you just said the arts are incompetent, so don't argue.
Set aside the fact that someone paid essentially $70 million for a JPEG. Look at this image. Why would anyone pay for this? It's a dog's breakfast. At present value, that makes this JPEG roughly worth the same as Van Gogh's L'Allée des Alicombe, Picasso's La Gameuse, and just over half the value of this pastel rendering of Munch's The Scream.
It me.
Right?
Is that you?
Yeah.
It says pause for laughs. Do you remember our friend Sophia, the AI robot from Travis Gray's consent talk a few years ago?
Gay for Sophia.
It turns out she's now engaged in creative pursuits. Last month, a non-fungible token artwork that she created sold for $688,000. This is fucking crazy.
Support women, Pat.
Last fuckwit writers. But she's a robot. Like, I don't want to assume it's gender.
It's a robot.
Last Fuckwit Writers Festival, that is 2 years ago, Vivian told us that her favourite game to play is Who's at Fault? And I'd like to play that for now.
People talk about me.
Is it the billionaire class who profited massively while the rest of us were in lockdown?
Yes.
Jerry Harvey pocketed $22 million worth of taxpayer of JobKeeper money,
I wish he pocketed one dick in his
refusing to
face.
pay it back despite turning a $462 million net profit up 116% on the year prior. As he explained to the Sydney Morning Herald, from our point of view, it's a tiny amount of money and our thoughts are all about business going forward. This is re the $22 million that we paid him. Indeed, a tiny amount of money that he's keeping, a gift from the Australian taxpayer. Or a gift from our desperately fake yobbo of a Prime Minister. Seen here...
Luke's already done a depressing talk, right?
Oh, this is going to get worse. So. But Luke's, I feel like, was large-scale depressing. Mine really goes for, like, the personal.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So seen here grasping at the hands of people who hate him and who basically he left to burn while he was sucking down pina coladas in Hawaii.
Well, I would...
And here he is. Here he is, brutally snatching the hands of the first woman in Australia to get vaccinated right before he got the Pfizer shot, which he's now stolen from some blood clot-ridden 28-year-old. This woman later admitted she had no idea who he was. So actually, she was being assaulted right then by the Prime Minister. Lesson time.
Wait, was it not already a lesson?
Turn to the schmuck next to you. I'm going to give you a minute. Explain in a quick sentence or two who run the world and how you know this. Go. You have a second?
Absolutely Beyonce.
Yeah, and then once you've told your story, turn to someone else next to you and say it.
I think it's Beyonce.
Okay, that's enough talk.
The girls run the world. It's their fault.
Okay, so Viv, what was your conversation with Lisa?
So Lisa and I said, who run the world? Girls. And how do we know that? I got...
Wait, girls
And Beyonce.
no.
No. Beyonce.
Girls and... Good conversation?
Oh, Putin. And
Girls and Putin, you're half right.
And we knew, in the answer to your second question, because I got a flu vaccine 2 weeks ago. So my brain is being controlled by the government.
And Putin.
There's the Putin reference. Over here, Riley?
I said Rupert Murdoch and Cass responded promptly because News Corp.
Okay. Chris, who we...
Participate.
Okay.
Oh,
I mean, like, throw there. Yes, Luke, of course. The enthusiastic child up the front. Me, miss. Here, sir.
Girls, obviously, and Beyonce told us, but so there's a blame.
Well, anyway,
Sorry, we all just
Lisa, I don't know how many times I have...
you're wrong, all wrong.
all wrong.
Drawing on the work of Nazi philosopher Carl Schmitt, Giorgio Agamben theorised a thing called the state of exception. So actually, the people that run the world, Agamben argued, were the people who are able to define the state of exception. The place where the law that gives them power is suspended.
So Varys?
No.
So Wakanda?
No. So, well, let me develop this further. The real sovereign is the person who can suspend the law to create spaces where the law that installs them as sovereign and restrains their power doesn't actually operate.
Black Panther.
Achille Mbembe takes it a step further, calling this necropolitics. He calls it the power over life and death. Power continually refers and appeals to exception, emergency, and a fictionalized notion of the enemy. So the people who are able to define the enemy, the state of exception, the point at which the law no longer applies, those are the people who have the real power. In Nazi Germany, the state of exception was the concentration camp.
I hope you don't think it's homophobic, but I think they can eat a dick.
So the pandemic is a really good example. When a state of emergency is declared, our health ministers and our chief health officers have practically unlimited jurisdiction to restrict our freedom. That's why we can't leave the country at the moment. Take the example of Melbourne.
He's missing an espresso.
Victoria has
That's my calling!
Blaze, can you flick the light switch behind you? Oh, yeah. Do you want it off again? Oh, okay, off. Okay. I apologise. I don't know what... But it was also a demonstration here who can define the power in the room. Victoria has extended its state of emergency until at least December 17 this year. They're still in a state of emergency. Last year, Human Rights Watch expressed concern about the severity and extent of the policy response to COVID restrictions. In New South Wales, if people were on public transport without a mask, New South Wales police handed them a disposable one. In Victoria, if people were seen without a mask, Victoria police handed them a fine. At one point, Victoria police were preemptively arresting people for saying on Facebook that they were going to breach lockdown and go to a protest. Now, we can all agree that anti-lockdown protesters and COVID conspiracy theorists are jerks and crazy. That's all well and good when you're trying to contain a virus and you haven't got Kerry Chant. The point is to imagine what happens when the power to define the state of exception is put to use by bad faith actors like Peter Dutton.
That's too clean to be
Pause for laughs. Yeah.
There's enough rock.
Pause for laughs.
Look at his eyes!
The family from Billawheeler, they've been living in an island prison for nearly 3 years now, gilded at the cost of $6 million to the Australian taxpayer, despite their community back in Queensland wanting them to be naturalised. The man responsible for keeping them here at this great expense is Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton is so...
He looks like the demigod.
He is so politically absent of basic human decency that his wife had to remind us in the lead up. Sorry.
Look at the way he's holding her wrist.
Yeah.
Queensland cop.
He was a Queensland cop. Yeah.
Out of the force during the commission.
Peter Dutton is so politically absent, basic human decency, that his wife had to remind us in the lead up to his failed bid for the Prime Ministership that he is not a monster. Pause for laughs. But actually, what kind of human would waste public money keeping a single family isolated in an island? For the same price, we could have vaccinated another 150,000 Australians with the Pfizer vaccine, or put another way, the entire frontline workforce exposed to the virus. While our political leaders have enabled this wanton waste and artistic carnage, the rest of us have endured a year locked within the gilded prison known as Australia, unable to leave for fear of infection. Scott Morrison.
No, because when you look at that picture, you're inside their bedroom in IKEA.
You're in their bedroom in IKEA.
No, I know, but why say welcome inside their bedroom?
It's creepy.
Because you're inside the bedroom. It's the era. Alright, move on.
What disturbs me is that people are probably fucking in their bedroom in IKEA.
Hands up if you
We got into their bed in IKEA, we took a photo and sent it to them, and the people were like, please move along now.
Please stop fucking in this bedroom.
Scott Morrison has kept us in prison in this country waiting for a vaccine that won't give us blood clots or turn us into 5G transmitter towers. All of these sons of bitches running the country need us to pay... All they need us to do is pay Egypt enough money to get us the most effective cure to coronavirus known to mankind.
There it is!
Sarcophagus!
The red liquid from the dark sarcophagus.
Drink it!
Let us drink it!
Oh!
No!
That's the straw.
That was an upcycled elephant.
Rather than put all of our eggs in the AstraZeneca basket, Clot Morrison could have invested a mere pittance in seeking out some of the red liquid from the dark sarcophagus, which I'm convinced would solve all of our problems. After all, what's the worst thing that could happen? Death? If you're a woman under the age of 50, you've got a 1 in a million chance of getting the same thing from AstraZeneca.
And I am.
At least this way, you've got some chance of acquiring supernatural powers as well as becoming immune to COVID. I beg your pardon?
I'm interested.
In fact, as a young woman, you have an arguably lower chance of dangerous side effects with either AstraZeneca or the red liquid from the dark sarcophagus than you do from dating Armie Hammer. As one of his victims explained, Armie is obsessed with drinking human blood, being a cannibal, manipulating and rewiring the human brain. This sounds exactly like the Liberal government. It sounds like the vaccine. It sounds like 5G. But don't take this person's word for it. Listen to Armie himself. I am 100% a cannibal. I want to eat you. Fuck, that's scary to admit. I included this typo B. I've cut the heart out of a living animal before and eaten it while still warm. Totally raw. Still warm. I'd eat your heart if it wasn't stuck without you afterwards. I kind of was hoping that he'd say, I'd eat your heart if I wasn't stuck with you afterwards, because it's just the extra kick of like, I hate you. But... Oh yeah.
Oh my god, you're a mess.
The text message.
Some self-esteem jokes.
The text messages were made.
You're married to an awful man already. You're the awful man.
The text messages were made public earlier this year.
No offense.
Armie explained fairly unambiguously that he is 100% a cannibal, which is a pretty high degree of confidence. As opposed to someone who identifies as merely 50 or 60% cannibal. He's cut the heart out of a living animal and eaten totally raw while still warm. If you think this zombie cannibal situation sounds like a zombie cannibal situation, as though COVID were closer to the T-virus from Resident Evil than a boring respiratory illness from a bat, then you haven't been paying close enough attention. The derangement is accelerating. We're actually struggling to decouple celebrity culture from actual politics.
Alien actually fucking brilliant. Who's taking a photo? Alien plus side profile really believes in Free Britney and Palestine.
Our measure of who the real victims are, the people occupying the state of exception, and I will also say that Palestine, the Palestinian territories, the West Bank, Gaza, constitute a state of exception.
Just say Israel.
No, but actually those spaces are a place where Israel has imposed a state of exception. The law doesn't apply because of the occupation, so we've got another state of exception there. The same goes for Brittany, with a conservatorship. Her father has imposed a state of exception on Brittany's life. She has no legal control over her own life.
And she's in a gilded prison.
She's in a gilded prison.
That's the name of the door. Yeah.
So our measure of who the real victims are is hugely off-kilter. By now, you're probably starting to realise that a lot of these gilded prisons are actually just gilded paddocks where the rich and powerful can frolic to their heart's content, while the rest of us schmucks while away our time cheering whenever the wheels of global consumer capitalism grind to a halt for a moment and remind us that there's more to life than this Ferris wheel of mediocrity.
What about in the game?
Given this, is it any wonder that 1 in 5 Australians experience a mental illness in any year, and depression has the 3rd highest burden of any disease in this country? There is something subterranean going on here. How does our generation... How does our generation medicate for this miserable condition? Largely through memes. Though I understand the trope of nihilism and ironic detachment is deeply millennial and it's not shared by Gen Z.
Gen Z could get in the booth.
Which is also a deeply millennial thing to say. So now, even the idea of laughing at the void is just another reminder that I am aging and I will eventually die. Would you like to know something even more depressing?
Yes!
Are you ready for this? Our bodies are prisons that trap our consciousness. Strip away mobility and interaction support, and this is what you are left with: a pure nervous system. That's a human. Sans mobility and interaction support. A brain.
filter on it. Put a filter on that, and that's me on a Saturday night.
This is a brain with sensory inputs attached to it.
As I say, put a filter on it.
We could be fully tuned into our senses. This is what we'd look like, a bundle of nerve endings attached to a brain and eyes. I seriously identify with this creature. How could you not wake up every morning with that look on your face? Get me the Nurofen! And what is the answer to this problem? I think there's a lesson to be learned here from Beaker, whose existential horror makes perfect sense when confronted with the maniacal experiments of Dr. Bunsen Honeydew. Beaker's horror...
Makes a valid point by saying, me.
Beaker's horror is not just at the immediate material circumstances in which he finds himself poisoned, on fire, doused in chemicals, pacified with electricity. He's also appalled by the amoral dogmatic scientism of Dr. Honeydew.
Honeydew was part of Project Paperclip.
In Beaker's mind runs Oppenheimer citing the Bhagavad Gita at the Trinity test. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Or perhaps Beaker is simply reflecting on Martin Luther King's moral rejoinder. Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men. There is no technocratic path to freedom from these gilded prisons. The problem isn't a lack of technical intelligence, it's a lack of ethical and political awareness.
Yes.
I'll do what I want.
The prisons that exist today aren't an accident of history. The prisons that exist today aren't an accident of history. The prisoners we put there are put there by design, and the system that incarcerated them is run by these same billionaires who would have us believe that they are as trapped as anybody else, and that there's no alternative. Well, there are alternatives. Pause for laughs.
And for my arsehole.
Oh my god, it's Cass, you touched your hairboards!
Just fuck me!
Hey, Cass, how do you feel about being in this?
I'm famous.
And do you like being blonde?
Cass, you just made a voice rise. That ain't you, babe. That ain't you. You look good.
I'm so glad this is
What? We can beg for the comet. Whether it comes in virus form, climate change, or a literal space rock to smash us in the arsehole. Or we can learn from this vicious robot. And we can get angry and we can find solutions. We need to get real here. The people in prisons are not celebrities, they're not financiers, they're not royals or politicians. This is a ridiculous lie. They are. This is a ridiculous lie to sustain the festival of late capitalism. Because there are children who are being held in the basement, out of sight and out of mind. Children who are robbed of the freedoms that they had for the sake of what? A state of exception? The performance of emergency and the perpetuation of power? A fictionalized notion of an enemy. In the end, the party in Omelas would continue for weeks, months, even years. People drank and they celebrated, they enjoyed, and they pretended like everything was fine. But then sometimes, out of nowhere, a person would stop, turn towards the horizon and walk away. Nobody knew where, but they'd never return.